At 2:47 a.m., fluorescent lights hummed in the small-town clinic, their glow harsh and unforgiving. A German shepherd named Rex stood trembling on his hind legs beside the cold steel table, his scarred body quivering under the weight of desperation. His massive paws pressed together in a haunting mimicry of prayer, amber eyes fixed on the unconscious form of his mate, Rusty. Foam clung to her muzzle, her chest rattling with shallow, failing breaths. The acrid sweetness of antifreeze tainted the air, announcing poison. Dr. Sarah Mitchell moved swiftly, her hands trained but her face pale with disbelief. Marcus Thompson stood frozen, the room collapsing into a blur of light and memory. He had faced gunfire in deserts, explosions in mountains, yet never terror like this. Beside him, the war dog begged for a miracle no words could command, a prayer older than language itself. Rusty's body convulsed, her fur slick with sweat, breath whistling as though dragged through broken glass. Each gasp seemed like her last, a rhythm that fractured Marcus's composure. He had carried brothers off battlefields, but watching her fade hollowed him deeper than shrapnel ever had. Flashbacks clawed at his mind, desert sands red with blood, helicopters' blades strobing the sky, the metallic taste of imminent death. His legs threatened to buckle, phantom pain radiating from his limp. Yet here, in this sterile room, the battlefield felt closer than ever. Rex's low whimper sliced through the haze, a sound unbearably human, vibrating with grief and fury. Sarah whispered urgent numbers to herself, machines beeping warnings that only she could decipher. The clinic's walls seemed to close in, trapping them in a crucible of time, where seconds stretched into eternities and the fate of a family teetered at the edge of silence.
As Sarah worked, her sharp eyes caught something unusual. Rusty's legs bore jagged scrapes, as though she had fought violently before collapsing. Under her nails, dried blood clung stubbornly, alien against her golden fur. The discovery sent a tremor through the air, reshaping the narrative of the night. This was not a careless accident or a tragic stumble into spilled chemicals. Someone had cornered Rusty. Someone had attacked her. Rex's body stiffened as though sensing the confirmation of what he already knew. His muscles rippled with restrained fury, yet he remained frozen in his prayer stance, refusing to abandon the one tethering him to hope. For Marcus, the sight was another wound layered upon a soul already scarred. He clenched his fists, his knuckles blanching, haunted by a realization that battles had followed him home, reshaping his quiet sanctuary into another war zone. Somewhere in darkness, an enemy still walked free. Marcus's mind wrenched backward, past the sterile clinic and flickering machines, to a night heavy with lilac and rain. Eleanor Hartwell had lain frail and trembling in her farmhouse bed, eyes bright despite a body consumed by cancer. Her hands had gripped his with surprising strength as she entrusted him with her two beloved shepherds. She had spoken of survival, of loyalty that endured beyond human frailty. "Promise me they'll be loved," she had whispered, her chest rising like a tide that would not return. That promise had rooted itself in Marcus's marrow, deeper than duty, stronger than war's command. Now, standing over Rusty's crumpling form, he felt those words burn alive once more. The weight of keeping them pressed into him as harshly as desert sand against bleeding skin. Rex's desperate prayer mirrored Eleanor's dying plea, both echoing into his soul like twin calls demanding the impossible.
Sarah's tests returned quickly. Samples hurried into crude analysis under buzzing fluorescent tubes. Her trained eyes widened at the result. Embedded beneath Rusty's nails was human skin. The implications crashed like thunder. Rusty hadn't stumbled into poison. She had fought, resisted, and clawed her attacker with primal courage. Evidence of a struggle lingered in every splintered cell, silent testimony of a predator bold enough to confront a war dog's mate. Rex's eyes glowed in the dim light, sensing vindication of his unyielding vigil. Marcus's breath caught, rage and grief twisting together until they became indistinguishable. The shadows inside him whispered reminders of Kandahar, of ambushes at dusk, of comrades gasping in dust. The parallels burned him raw. Someone had waged war on his family, and Rusty had taken the first blow. Every passing second in that room felt heavier, dragging them deeper into an unfolding siege of fate. Sirens outside cut the silence. Sheriff Ben Rodriguez entered with deputies, their boots echoing like verdicts. The report was swift, too swift, as if rehearsed. A container of antifreeze had been discovered in Marcus's garage. Paw prints smudged its surface, and fingerprints, his fingerprints, glared like accusations. Marcus's stomach sank, but not with guilt, with recognition. This was too precise, too convenient, the kind of cruelty only premeditation delivers. Eyes around him flickered with doubt, suspicion coiling like smoke in a tight room. Even the sheriff's weathered face carried hesitation, duty pressing against instinct. Rex growled low, amber eyes flashing, as his massive frame positioned between Marcus and the deputies. Sarah's heart clenched, caught between clinical focus and the unraveling of truth. A frame had been constructed, a trap that fit too well, and in its iron jaws, Marcus stood accused, while his family lay broken before him.
Word spread faster than wildfire across dry prairie grass. By dawn, whispers in the diner hissed Marcus's name like a curse. Some who had once nodded respectfully at his limp now avoided his gaze. Neighbors murmured of betrayal, of hidden cruelty. Others remembered his service, his scars, and spoke of impossibility. The town fractured, each coffee cup filled with suspicion or defense. The burden pressed on Marcus heavier than body armor ever had. To be accused of harming those who had given him new life cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Rex refused to leave his side, posture rigid, eyes burning with unwavering conviction. Sarah and Jake stood silently by him, the last thin cords of loyalty in a town unraveling. In the sterile clinic, with Rusty's ragged breath filling the silence, the walls seemed to absorb the echo of accusations and faith fighting for dominance. Sheriff Rodriguez's voice, steady but grim, cut through the clamor. 17 poisoned dogs across the county over the last half year. Until tonight, every case dismissed as tragic accidents on rural land. Carelessness with fluids, curiosity of farm dogs. But patterns surfaced now, too deliberate to ignore. Rusty wasn't an isolated tragedy. She was the latest in a sequence, a survivor where others had not been. Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears, each number a bullet. 17 silent graves, and now his Rusty lay on the edge. Sarah's mind ran with icy clarity, piecing strands of evidence no one else dared to. This was orchestrated, a campaign of cruelty, sharpened like a blade. Rex's low growl deepened, vibrating the air, as though he too understood the scope of war encroaching. The walls of the clinic no longer held sanctuary. They had become the front line of a county-wide battlefield.
Sarah crouched near Rex, her clinical eye catching details others missed. Fresh scratches marred his muzzle and chest, deeper than play or accident. The marks told a story. Rex had fought someone, shielding Rusty until she fell. That someone had survived his fury. The realization stole her breath. This was no simple poisoning left to chance. The enemy had engaged, had dared challenge a decorated war dog and walked away. Marcus's chest clenched, the past bleeding into the present. He had trusted Rex in Afghanistan with his life. Now Rex bore scars that screamed of unfinished war. The dog's silent prayer stance transformed, no longer just pleading, but declaring his readiness to defend again. Time, however, was a cruel enemy. Blood still stained his coat, and his body quivered from exhaustion, but his eyes remained locked on Rusty. Marcus recognized the truth. This was loyalty weaponized by love. The sheriff's jaw tightened as he weighed evidence against instinct. Richard Hayes's name hung in the air, a failed contractor with motives carved by resentment. Marcus's damning inspection report had cost Hayes everything: company, fortune, reputation. But the puzzle felt too clean, too convenient. Hayes's rage alone could not explain how Marcus's fingerprints clung to poisoned containers, nor how evidence surfaced at precisely the right moment. Sarah watched silently, her thoughts burning. Too many alignments pointed to inside betrayal. Jake's young eyes held a truth older than adults dared to admit. He saw no guilt in Marcus, only the ache of a man watching family unravel. Outside, the dawn stretched cold and pale, as if the world itself recoiled from what lay ahead. In the sterile clinic, suspicion thickened like fog, and faith grew brittle against the steel weight of orchestrated lies.
The decision came with the weight of inevitability. Marcus's wrists were bound in cold steel, the echo of the cuffs clicking shut, louder than any gunfire he had ever endured. Rex's growl vibrated the floor as he pressed his massive body against Marcus, refusing to let the deputies take him. The air bristled with a primal challenge, loyalty standing against law. Sheriff Rodriguez's voice carried no triumph, only burden, his weathered eyes torn between procedure and the instinct that told him something was deeply wrong. Sarah clenched her jaw, helpless to intervene, her focus split between Rusty's shallow breaths and the injustice tightening around Marcus's throat. Jake clung to the edge of the examination table, silent witness to a fracture too complex for his years. The clinic, once a sanctuary of healing, had become an arena where devotion and doubt collided under flickering fluorescent light. Beyond the sterile walls, whispers curled into name and face. Richard Hayes emerged from shadow, a man stripped bare by failure. His construction empire had collapsed under the weight of Marcus's uncompromising inspection reports. Years of bitterness fermented into venom, his eyes hollow yet burning with accusation. He wandered the county like a ghost clinging to grudges, each step fueled by resentment. Marcus had long dismissed his threats as empty echoes of a desperate man. But now, with Rusty's life slipping and his own reputation smeared, Hayes's specter loomed with sharpened menace. To the town, the motive fit too neatly, like a puzzle that assembled itself. Yet in that very precision lay unease, as though someone had written the story before it unfolded. Sarah felt it gnawing at her bones. Hayes was dangerous, yes, but danger this orchestrated rarely walked alone. Somewhere, unseen hands turned darker wheels.
Deputy Collins appeared with evidence too quickly, his voice sharp, his posture eager. The discovery of tools and traces linking Marcus to Hayes's sabotage came with suspicious neatness, as though rehearsed. His words carried authority, yet lacked the weight of authenticity. Sheriff Rodriguez's brow furrowed, his instincts whispering distrust, but duty chained him to protocol. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her mind capturing every detail like a camera flash. The cadence of Collins' voice, the timing of his reports, the convenience of each discovery. Every strand wove into a pattern too deliberate. Jake, crouched quietly in the corner, watched the young deputy with unblinking eyes. Even a child sensed the cracks where adults faltered. Outside, wind rattled the clinic's windows like an omen. Inside, betrayal coiled silently, unseen by most, yet heavy enough to bend the air. Collins was no mere observer in this unfolding storm. He was feeding it. The town began to fracture under the strain of suspicion. At the diner, voices once raised in laughter now splintered into sharp whispers. Coffee cups clinked with mistrust, and every word carried the sting of judgment. Farmers who had once nodded at Marcus's limp now turned away, whispering of hidden cruelty.
Others clung to memories of his service, his sacrifices etched into the soil of foreign battlefields. The divide widened, not in shouts, but in silences heavy enough to crush. Sarah stood firm in her conviction, her son's hand tucked tightly in hers. Rex remained sentinel, eyes unwavering, a living embodiment of loyalty that refused compromise. Yet Marcus, confined by suspicion and steel, felt the shift like a blade pressed to his throat. War had returned, not with bullets, but with mistrust, and it was unraveling the fragile fabric of the life he had tried to rebuild.
Rusty's body weakened as hours stretched thin. Her breaths came in shallow waves, each one threatening to be her last. Monitors beeped with cruel rhythm, each tone stabbing Marcus even through the walls of custody. Rex's trembling grew more violent, his legs shaking under the weight of his prayer stance, yet he refused to collapse. His eyes, burning with devotion, never left Rusty. Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision, but her heart clenched tighter with every failing vital sign. The clinic's sterile air thickened into a suffocating weight. Jake hovered near Rex, whispering soft reassurances no machine could replicate. For Marcus, the sound of his mate's labored breaths echoed like battlefield moans, the soundtrack of helplessness he had sworn never to hear again. Rusty's light flickered, fragile, as though any shift in faith might extinguish it forever. In that room, even the walls seemed to pray. In an act of reluctant mercy, Sheriff Rodriguez allowed Marcus a brief visit, shackled wrists heavy with accusation. Marcus moved to Rusty's side, his body trembling with restrained grief. He lowered his hands, steel biting into his skin until his fingers brushed her fur. In that instant, the monitors shifted. Her heart rate steadied, her breaths deepened, faint but undeniable. A ripple of astonishment passed through the room. Rex whimpered, his prayer stance trembling but unbroken, as though urging her back with his own unyielding will. Sarah's throat tightened, her clinical mind silenced by the undeniable miracle unfolding before her eyes. Marcus's tears fell freely, salt mixing with Rusty's matted coat. It was not science alone that had steadied her. It was love, loyalty, and the tether of promise woven tighter than any chain. The impossible had cracked the sterile order of medicine, if only for a moment.
Far from the clinic's fragile miracle, lawmen combed through Hayes's abandoned storage unit. Dust clung to boxes, and in their depths lay a grim ledger of obsession. Maps marked with red circles, photographs of dogs across the county, notes scrawled with venomous precision, containers of poisoned bait, meticulous records of each animal's last days, a hit list with Marcus's address circled in bold. The scope was chilling, not the chaos of a drunkard's vengeance, but the order of a campaign. Sheriff Rodriguez's gut twisted with grim recognition. This was no accident, no rash act of fury. This was deliberate, methodical cruelty. Yet Hayes himself was gone, vanished into the night like smoke slipping through fingers. The evidence pointed to guilt undeniable, but the silence of his absence left unease heavier than proof. Somewhere, unseen, the predator watched as his plans unfolded, waiting for the perfect strike. Back at the clinic, Walt Thompson arrived, his gait slow but steady, the weight of years etched into his shoulders. A veteran of wars long past, his eyes still burned with the sharpness of survival. He laid a hand on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture firm despite the chain of suspicion clamped around him. His voice carried the gravity of memory, recalling ambushes and betrayals where evidence had been forged, where good men had been sacrificed by lies. Trust instincts, he urged, his gaze fixed on the sheriff, not tidy stories built too neatly. His words cut through the fog like a flare in darkness. Rex's eyes flicked toward him, amber light reflecting something beyond instinct, as though he too recognized the truth in an old soldier's tone. For Marcus, Walt's presence felt like sandbags against rising floodwaters, fragile but vital in the storm of betrayal closing in.
The night deepened, shadows stretching long across the Colorado hills. Outside the clinic, headlights flickered briefly before vanishing into black. Sheriff Rodriguez's call crackled with urgency. Hayes's truck had been sighted near town, its movements erratic, circling like a predator. Inside the clinic, silence thickened, broken only by the rhythmic beep of machines. Rex stiffened, ears pricking toward the door, his growl a low thunder rolling in his chest. Marcus's pulse quickened, instincts sharpened by battle. Every flicker of shadow against the window seemed alive, every gust of wind a whispered threat. Sarah steadied her hands on Rusty's IV line, though her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. Jake clutched at Rex's fur, sensing danger through the dog's tense body. The clinic, once a place of healing, now felt like a bunker under siege, each wall straining against the weight of approaching violence. The attack came not with noise, but with silence. At 9:47 p.m., the clinic's lights flickered and died, plunging the building into a red haze of emergency backup. The sudden darkness pressed like a suffocating blanket. Equipment hummed weakly on auxiliary power, casting grotesque shadows across tiled floors. Outside, wind howled like distant artillery, carrying the scent of inevitability. Inside, Rex's growl deepened into something primal, a battle cry hidden beneath fur. Marcus moved instinctively, his body sliding into defensive positions as though the years had folded back to foreign deserts. Sarah's breath quickened, but her hands never stopped moving over Rusty, tethering mother and unborn lives to fragile machines. Jake clutched at Rex's fur, sensing danger through the dog's tense body. The clinic transformed into a war zone, and the enemy had arrived.
The corridors of the clinic narrowed into choke points, every doorway a potential battlefield. Marcus positioned himself near the examination room, his body angled to shield the fragile lives inside. His instincts sharpened, soldiers' training flooding back, each breath measured, each sound magnified. Beside him, Rex lowered into a stance of controlled readiness, his scarred frame rigid with anticipation. Sarah refused to abandon her post, her focus locked on Rusty's faltering form, her hands steady despite the quiver of fear thrumming beneath her skin. Jake crouched low, eyes wide, holding to faith that the dog who had once preyed could now protect. Outside, a glass pane rattled under unseen pressure, the sound of intrusion approaching. The air thickened, the red emergency glow painting them all in the colors of blood and war. The past had returned, not as memory, but as reality, bearing down through the clinic walls. As the storm outside pressed closer, Rusty's body convulsed, muscles contracted in violent waves, too soon, too fragile. Her belly tightened, and the rhythm of her monitors spiked erratically. The poisoning, the stress, the encroaching fear had triggered labor. Sarah's eyes darted to the monitors, reading danger in every flashing number. The pups were coming, each contraction stealing Rusty's reserves, dragging her closer to collapse. Marcus's throat tightened as the scene shifted from battlefield to delivery room, two wars colliding in one fragile body. Rex pressed closer to her side, his massive frame trembling but immovable, a sentinel of love as the first tremors of new life fought to surface. Outside, footsteps crunched against broken glass, closing in. Inside, life and death tangled. Every second, a coin flip between tragedy and miracle. The clinic had become a crucible, forging destiny with fire and blood.
The door burst open, the intruder's shadow slicing through the crimson glow. Hayes emerged, rifle in hand, face twisted with fury sharpened by years of loss. Rex launched forward, a blur of muscle and scars, intercepting before the weapon could level.
The struggle was primal, man against beast, hatred against loyalty. A blade flashed in Hayes' grip, a contractor's knife honed to lethal sharpness. It slashed across Rex's shoulder, tearing through fur and reopening the wound carved years ago in Afghan dust. A cry split the air, raw and agonized, the kind of sound that silences hearts. Blood slicked the tiles as Rex staggered but refused to release his grip. Marcus surged forward, vision narrowing, battle instinct seizing control. The fight was no longer about law or guilt. It was survival, written in wounds and blood, measured in the seconds before another heartbeat failed. The clash unfolded in brutal rhythm, fists and fury colliding in the narrow corridor. Hayes swung with desperation, a man hollowed by failure, wielding rage like a weapon. Marcus countered with precision born of training, each strike carrying years of discipline layered over raw instinct. The rifle clattered across the floor, forgotten in the storm of bodies. Rex, bleeding but unyielding, circled, his amber eyes locked on the threat, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. The air reeked of iron, sweat, and the acrid tang of antifreeze that still clung to Rusty's coat. Memories of war fused with the present, Kandahar's dust overlaying sterile tile, screams of soldiers echoing beneath Hayes' roar. Marcus fought not for medals, not for survival alone, but for family, the fragile, precious bond forged in pain and loyalty. Each blow carried the weight of promises kept, debts owed and futures not yet surrendered.
Even as fists clashed and blood spattered across white tile, a new sound pierced the chaos. Rusty's body heaved, and from her trembling form came the first weak cry of a newborn. The room stilled for a heartbeat, war colliding with life. 5 were expected, yet 6 bodies pressed within her. The 6th emerged small, fragile, marked with a patch of white on her chest, glowing faintly under red light. Hope embodied in fur, a secret hidden until the moment of greatest despair. Hayes staggered, pinned beneath Marcus's weight, his fury hollowed by the sound of life rising where he had tried to carve death. Rex, though bleeding, dragged himself toward the whelping box, eyes softening at the sight of the miracle he had fought for. In that instant, life triumphed, not in words, not in victory speeches, but in a single fragile cry against the void. Pinned against cold linoleum, Hayes gasped, his fury unraveling into tears that cut grooves through blood and sweat. His voice cracked with desperation, demanding an end, begging for the final mercy of death. Marcus, breath ragged, rifle pressed in his hands, felt the weight of war press into his bones. In Afghanistan, the choice would have been simple: neutralize the threat and move on. But here, with Rex bleeding beside him and Rusty birthing fragile life, vengeance tasted hollow. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus lowered the weapon. Hayes' eyes widened in disbelief as the soldier chose restraint over execution. To kill him would feed the cycle Hayes had already surrendered to. To spare him was to reclaim a piece of himself lost in desert battles and sleepless nights. It was not mercy alone. It was defiance, the refusal to let hatred write the final line of his story.
Time fractured into 2 fronts, one in blood, the other in birth. Sarah and Jake moved swiftly, guiding Rusty through contractions that threatened to crush her weakened body. One by one, pups slid into trembling hands, slick with newness, their cries thin yet defiant. Each life coaxed into breath was a small resurrection, defying poison, defying despair. Rusty's eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion, but her instinct carried her forward, tongue cleaning, body shielding. Rex, though wounded, pressed close, his massive frame trembling yet protective, his presence anchoring mother and newborns alike. Marcus sat nearby, hands slick with sweat and blood, watching as miracles unfolded where tragedy had been scripted. The room swelled with cries, of puppies breathing, of a mother surviving, of a father refusing to fall.
It was not victory yet, but it was hope, loud and fragile, echoing against walls that had witnessed too much grief. When the storm of birth and battle quieted, Sheriff Rodriguez entered, his face pale from the night's revelations. In his hands lay an envelope, yellowed and brittle, found among Eleanor Hartwell's belongings. He opened it slowly, the words etched in careful handwriting. She had foreseen this bond, foreseen the healing that Marcus would not seek, but would find in Rex and Rusty. She spoke of a child marked by light, a final gift of loyalty that would outlast grief. Marcus's chest tightened as his eyes fell on the tiny white patch gleaming on the chest of the smallest pup. Hope incarnate, foretold by a woman who believed in second chances even as she faced her end. The letter's words wove through the room like a benediction, a reminder that some promises echo beyond graves, anchoring the living to purpose stronger than despair.
With Hayes in custody and his conspiracy unraveling, the town began to mend fractured bonds. Suspicion gave way to shame, doubt to resolve. Marcus's innocence was cleared, not by testimony alone, but by the visible devotion of creatures who could not lie. Sarah's clinic, once a battlefield, became a sanctuary of survival, each corner stained with proof of endurance. Sheriff Rodriguez carried new resolve, his badge now heavier with the weight of lessons learned. Jake's young heart carried pride that would never fade, having witnessed love triumph over suspicion. Marcus, though scarred, began to find footing where grief had once ruled. Rex healed slowly, his limp a mirror of Marcus's own, both wearing their wounds as symbols of battles fought for love. Rusty rested with her pups nestled close, each heartbeat a promise that from the ashes of hatred, life had risen unbroken. Months later, the Colorado sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Marcus sat on his repaired porch, scars softened by peace. At his feet, Rex lay vigilant, his muzzle grayer, eyes still burning with unyielding loyalty. Rusty stretched nearby, her 6 pups tumbling across grass, clumsy joy scattering through the air like sparks. Hope, the smallest, ran ahead of her siblings, chest patch gleaming under the fading light, the living mark of prophecy fulfilled. Sarah and Jake arrived often, their laughter mingling with barks, blending human and canine family into one unbroken whole. For Marcus, nightmares had faded to memories, his life no longer defined by loss, but by the steady rhythm of paws across wooden floors. The war was over, not in deserts far away, but in the quiet backyard where loyalty, love, and new life had forged redemption.